Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles. This is my tag team partner Jimmy Jam Garvin.
Thanks, P.S. Hayes. Gary Rhodes, everybody.
This is a Heel Heat Top 10, and the subject for our Top 10 this time is the Top 10 Wrestlers of the AWA.
One of the best federations in the 70s, 80s. I mean, they were around beforehand, but they really brought a lot of big superstars into the forefront.
Exactly. And a federation that was around for roughly 40 years, gave us lots of great wrestlers, gave us lots of great talent, trained a lot of the guys that were big superstars in the 80s and 90s, and the 70s as well. We'll go right into it. Our number 10 guy is a guy that would go on to be one of the biggest wrestlers ever. It was Hulk Hogan. Now, Hulk Hogan, while he was in AWA, he was a main challenger to Nick Bockwinkel's world title. He actually won it, but they reversed the decision.
I remember some of the matches that him and Bockwinkel had, and for people to say Hogan can't wrestle, at that point Hogan could wrestle pretty decent. And some of those matches were really classics.
Exactly, and the thing of it was, the reason that Hogan eventually left is that Vern Gagne didn't want to run with the ball with him, whereas Vince McMahon Jr. did.
Mm-hmm.
And if they would have the fans, if you go back and watch the matches, the fans are calling for Hogan to win the title. And it was coming right off, it was either right before or right after his Rocky stint where he had played Thunder Lips. So he was at the height, right at the beginning of Hulkamania in the AWA, a solid wrestler there and a solid contender for the title as a face.
True. Now we're going to number 9, one of the better heels of his generation, former Navy SEAL, former governor, Jesse the Body Ventura.
And a guy that influenced Hulk Hogan.
Oh, he influenced so many people. I mean, this guy here was hell on the microphone. Probably one of the best guys that doesn't get the credit for it on the mic. And also, after...
As a commentator.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was going to get to. And after he had to be forced to retire because of the blood clots in his legs, became one of the best commentators of all time.
Yep, and then while he was in the AWA, he had some classic feuds. Him and Adrian Adonis as the East-West connection versus the High Flyers, Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell, was some of the best tag team wrestling ever.
Do you think when Ventura and Adonis were together, that was the best part of Adonis' career?
Oh yeah, by far.
Yeah, that was an awesome tag team. Those two complemented each other so well.
Yeah, because Adonis wasn't as big as he eventually got. He was more in shape, more athletic. Yeah. Jesse Ventura always had an amazing look and an amazing body. He was a guy that was, if you made a wrestler, they would look like Jesse the Body Ventura, at least for that time.
Oh yeah.
And he brought a lot of the theatrics. He brought a lot of the gimmickry to it. A lot of the, the feather boas, the earrings, all that stuff he brought into it. Him and Superstar Billy Graham, kind of around the same era, doing about the same gimmick.
Superstar was out a little bit beforehand, but
Jesse had more of an attitude.
Exactly, and Hogan really got a lot of that from both these two, from Ventura and Superstar Billy Graham.
Now our number 8 guy is a guy that most people know mostly for his son, but he was a tremendous tag team wrestler as well as a singles competitor in the AWA, and that's Larry the Axe Hennig. He's a guy that I think he held the AWA World title. I know he's held it.
Held it.
No, okay. He never held it, but he did challenge several times for it when Vern Gagne controlled the division. And also, he was a tag team champion. I know that for a fact. But he was one of the solid workers that was in the late 60s, early 70s of the AWA that they could put out there, and he could have a great match with absolutely anybody on the card. And he worked well as a face and a heel.
Oh, you're so correct. He was probably one of Vern Gagne's best opponents. I wouldn't say his best, but he was up there on the list.
He definitely was a guy that he sold well. He had a great natural in-ring ability, as did his son and his grandson, who is so very underused right now. But Larry Hennig, the Axe, the original Hennig, he was by far, if it would have been a different era where the belts changed more, he probably would have had a world championship or two.
Oh, definitely. Now coming at number 7, Kind of a super heavyweight, if you will.
If you will.
If you will. Not that guy. Anyways, he's one of the guys. Jerry Blackwell. One of the big men that could deliver a drop kick. Yep, the Crusher. One of the big men that could actually deliver a drop kick, and was a formidable manager too.
Yeah, I remember he was part of Skandar Akbar's Devastation Incorporated, and he was one of the big heels in the company. Turned on Akbar, and was fighting against Devastation Incorporated, and he was one of the biggest baby faces at the time. Now, that was more towards the end of his career. He was more of one of those guys that they build that could win the Battle Royals, kind of like Haystacks Calhoun was billed. But I think he was a lot better actual in the ring than Haystacks Calhoun ever was.
Oh, yeah.
And he was a guy that, he could go out there. He was 400 or 500 pounds. He looked like a mountain, and he wrestled like a mountain.
Well, there's no comparison between him and Haystacks. Haystacks would just stay in the middle of the ring and let everybody come to him. Yeah. This guy actually would work a match.
Yeah, and he was good. And like we said about Larry, he's a guy that could work good as either a face or a heel.
Oh, yeah.
Now, coming off of that, a guy that almost solely worked as a heel, our number 6 guy, Mad Dog Vachon. One of the great promo guys in the 70s in the AWA. He was a guy, I think he had 2 AWA title reigns, if I'm not mistaken.
Pretty sure.
And he's a guy that was a big rival of Vern Gagne, where they were working in the Northwest, actually, in the Minnesota areas and going into Canada. Mad Dog was a Canadian wrestler, and he had a really big, solid fan base in Canada, and he was one of the really sinister villains. I remember his classic promo is him building the casket. You remember that promo? And then, I mean, he was a tremendous in-ring worker. He was one of the guys that they built like he was sadistic, and he liked to torture people. Almost a precursor to your Mankind's and Abdullah the Butchers.
He was Terry Funk before Terry Funk was Terry Funk.
Exactly.
Now, coming in at number 5, this guy is known for so many things. One of the best technical wrestlers of all time, would you agree? One of the best tag team wrestlers of all time, would you agree? And one of the most underestimated wrestlers of all time, Ray Stevens. This man, whoever he was with in a tag team, was gold.
Oh yeah, his tag team with Nick Bockwinkel was absolutely amazing.
Pat Patterson.
Him and Pat Patterson was amazing. He was managed by Bobby the Brain Heenan, and the combination of Heenan, Stevens, and Bockwinkel was purely gold. And Stevens broke away from the group so Bockwinkel could go on a solo career. But Ray Stevens is a guy that's kind of been forgotten by time how good he actually was. He's a guy that, he was Bockwinkel's partner. No, he was more than Bockwinkel's partner. He was Bockwinkel's equal.
Oh, he was. I mean, the only reason that he wasn't a champion and Bockwinkel was is because he stepped aside, I think. Honestly, he had the ability in the ring, out of the ring, on the mic. This guy had everything. He had the it factor, too.
Oh, yeah, he definitely did. He was when they broke the team up, the fans immediately went with him. And that's hard to do. Especially at that time, when they were heels for such a long time before they broke them up, that the fans, they just turned with him and they were ready to get behind him. Now, coming in at number 4 is a guy that, when you say AWA, it's one of the guys that comes to your mind first, Baron von Raschke. He's a guy that pretty much wrestled for AWA his entire career, and he started off as kind of a Nazi gimmick, and over the years evolved. He was a master of the claw hold. He's one of the guys that, as a kid, he kind of scared me.
Well, Baron von Raschke was a scary-looking dude, man.
Yeah, and that's when you got someone like that, and especially when you're selling it to children, and you got especially during the 70s and 80s, there was such a large wrestling fan base was under the age of 12, and it always has been, and it probably always will be. But for a kid to look at this guy and be actually frightened by him just by his look and that deep, gravelly voice that he had, really sold his character so well.
He was basically the precursor to The Undertaker, wouldn't you say?
Something like that. He had parts of that. Mad Dog Vachon had parts of that. I mean, before there were over-the-top gimmicks, he was one of the most out-there gimmicks. Kind of, him and guys like the Sheik and stuff like that were just out there and off the radar. guys like this that were the foreign invaders where the United States people could wrestle always sold well. And he was a damn good wrestler on top of it.
Oh, damn right. Now, coming in at number 3, my personal favorite.
You're salivating, aren't you?
Oh, I am. Probably the greatest technical wrestler ever to live. Probably one of the greatest athletes ever to live. Curt Hennig, or Mr. Perfect, later to be known.
Why don't you read what it says on the card?
No, I'm not. Anyways, Curt Hennig, really, he's had wrestling in his blood. He's a second-generation wrestler. One of the most technically gifted, most technically sound wrestlers of all time.
Why don't you name off some of the accolades he had in the AWA?
Well, he was the AW Tag Team Champion, AWA Champion.
At a time when the AWA was losing a lot of solid wrestlers, Curt was the mainstay, and he was the guy that they put out there as the face of the company, and he really did deserve it at the time. First he had the tag team with Scott Hall, before Scott Hall became Razor Ramon even. They had a tremendous tag team, and they sold very well in the AWA. And Perfect, when he broke off and he did his singles run and he became the world champion, he was a very valuable asset to that company. He was a guy, he was almost the glue that gave it, because AWA was losing people left and right. They lost guys like Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. Baron Von Raschke even left at some point. Sergeant Slaughter had left. Other guys had, left from the company. And they were left with the younger talent, and I think Curt Hennig was one of the guys that gave it a shot in the arm that people kept watching for.
Oh, you're damn right there. Oh, it's real.
But, he definitely deserves to be up here. But he deserves to be number 3, because there's a couple guys that are still more deserving. And our number 2 guy is the guy that most people associate with the AWA, and that's Verne Gagne. He's a guy, I think, 10 times their champion?
Something like that. I can't remember exactly how many times. Well, he was the owner, so, back then a lot of the owners were the champion.
Yeah, and he was a guy, the reason that he could get away with it so much is because the fans loved Verne Gagne so much. Matter of fact, it took him, about 5 or 6 retirements before he could actually retire, because the fans kept wanting him to come back and tag with Greg Gagne, or wrestle Nick Bockwinkel, or do several different things.
Well, he created the company when NWA wouldn't let him get the title from Thez.
Exactly.
And at this point in that time, you had him and Lou Thez were just as big as any other athlete anywhere. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, definitely.
And these guys were actually having commercials and stuff. They were doing the commercials and everything like that before Hogan started doing them in the 80s.
Yeah, and Verne was a very, very smart businessman. He ran the AWA very well. Besides being a tremendous wrestler and a tremendous champion, the thing that was his downfall is when the 80s changed to more of the rock and wrestling era, he didn't evolve as well with the times.
No.
And that's the downfall of the AWA. He had a lot of money. If you watch the DVD, he had a lot of money fighting some legal battles that he had about his property, but that was basically the reason that they fell, and they're part of the WWE tape library now instead of being a competitor. Now, before we get to our number 1 guy, let's talk about some guys that just barely made the list. These are what we like to call the best of the rest. Now, the first guy is Sergeant Slaughter. A guy that everybody knows, a guy that everybody respects. He was a huge, huge star in the AWA, especially during the late 70s, early 80s, all the way up to the end of the AWA, when he was a guy that came, he came in and out. He would do his runs with Vince, he'd do his runs in the NWA, but he always came back to the AWA, and he was always a guy that could sell.
Oh, of course. And up next, Bruiser Brody. This guy would sell anywhere he went.
Oh, yeah. And he was a mainstay of Skandar Akbar's Devastation Incorporated, which I think he's the reason that Skandar Akbar and the whole group got over so well.
Oh, yeah.
Now we're going to switch gears a little bit. Probably the best female wrestler to ever be in the AWA, sensational Sherry Martel.
Of course.
There's nothing you could say. I mean, later on when she became Scary Sherry, they changed her look, but the girl She could absolutely wrestle, almost, I would say, better than most of the guys of her generation. Most of the male wrestlers couldn't even hang with her. And at her time in the AWA, before they started doing the makeup that they did in WWE, she was a very attractive woman as well.
Oh, of course. Now, going from female wrestlers to tag team wrestlers, Rhodes and Murdoch.
Yep, the Texas Outlaws.
Probably one of the most brutal tag teams of all time.
It's a precursor to tag teams like the Acolytes, the Legion of Doom. You know, all these hard-hitting badasses, they were started with Rhodes and Murdoch, who were two guys that were badasses. And if you think about it now, no one thinks about Dusty Rhodes as a heel, but he was a hell of a heel back in the day.
As soon as he picked that microphone up, though, he was probably one of the best faces of all time.
Exactly, but, you know, great tag team, great wrestlers on their own. Now, before we go into our number one, we'd like to hear your opinions. If we thought you put someone up too high, someone down too low, left someone off the list altogether, you think that we got someone on here that doesn't deserve to be on here, let us know what you think. Hit us up on our Facebook, hit us up on our Twitter, put it down where?
Down there.
Right down in the comments. Let us know. We're happy to admit when we're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So going into it, I'll let you do this one. Our number one guy, Gary.
Probably one of the best heels of all time. Often imitated, never duplicated. Nick Bockwinkel. This guy, if you really take a look at most of your heels from the 70s on, have a little bit of Nick Bockwinkel in them.
Oh, yeah.
Chris Jericho, when he quit being Y2J and became Chris Jericho, that was Nick Bockwinkel right there. Just to a T. That's, you know, using the big words, trying to be smarter than everybody else. That was awesome. Triple H with Evolution. Ric Flair. I mean, that's where it came from.
Everybody stole a little bit. He was the first guy to really wear the $1,000 suits, wear the Rolexes.
The $700 Gators, you know.
You know, all that stuff. Ric Flair amplified it later on, but Nick Bockwinkel was the basis of it. And the reason that he could say this and get away with it, much like Ric Flair could, much like Triple H could, much like Y2J could, was because there was absolutely no one that could go in the ring and beat him. Because the guy was one of the absolute best workers there's ever been in the business.
Right, and the guy could shoot too. If someone didn't want to play ball with him,
yep,
they'd learn the hard way. You look at the Four Horsemen. Now you had the Four Horsemen in the 80s. You had Bockwinkel, Stevens, and Heenan in the 70s. You know, what would your group be?
I mean, it's apples and oranges.
Exactly.
But he's a guy. He was an awesome tag team wrestler. He broke off solo, and he's I think one of the greatest champions in the history of wrestling. And he was a guy. When I think of the AWA champion, even more than Vern, who held it more than anybody else, I think of Nick Bockwinkel, because all the classic matches. I mean, if you go up and down the list, there's not a guy on this list that Nick Bockwinkel didn't have an awesome match with. Hogan, Ventura, Larry the Axe Hennig, Jerry Blackwell, Mad Dog Vachon, Ray Stevens, Baron Von Raschke, Kurt Hennig, Vern Gagne, Sergeant Slaughter, Bruiser Brody. Every one of the guys that's on this list had some classic matches with Nick Bockwinkel. Him and Bobby the Brain Heenan was one of the most perfect combinations of manager and wrestler there's ever been. Because they were almost, it was almost like, if you're a comic book fan, Venom and his suit. The guy that became Eddie Brock and the Venom suit, where they got together and they became Venom. Mm-hmm. Heenan and Bockwinkel together were almost one character. And Heenan complimented Bockwinkel so well. They were both so cerebral with what they said. I mean, everything they did was absolutely money.
But you know, the thing is, too, when Heenan went to work for Vince, Bockwinkel didn't lose a step, though.
No.
That just shows you how great Nick Bockwinkel is.
Oh, he was. He's one of... in my opinion, he's definitely in my top 5 wrestlers of all time. And that's any corporation, anywhere. I mean, he's one of the best heels there's ever been. He's one of the best wrestlers there's ever been. But basically, that's all I got to say about this list. Is there anything you want to add?
That's it, my friend.
Well, this has been our Heel Heat Top 10. AWA wrestlers. My name is George Coles.
Gary Rhodes.
And this is Heel Heat.